Hi, welcome back to Frank's Final Review. Today we're going to review a record by the Talking Heads. I'm sure you're aware they've had sort of a resurgence based around the reissue of their famous live movie and album, the soundtrack to Stop Making Sense. I've seen a lot in terms in the media. Um, I actually still want to see the movie. I hear it's pretty good. I'm excited for them, and I also understand that this is the first time they've played together in 15 years, or something like that. I don't know the exact figure, but it's just nice to see them sort of reunified and hanging out together and playing music together and playing their music together, which is great. So without further ado, that's going to segue into this week's review. And I decided to go with a recent reissue. This came out fairly recent. I want to say it was October 6th of 2023. Talking Heads Naked. This is their eighth and final studio album. This was essentially their swan song. But as we will discuss, a very rich album with lots of great music and great colors, and just really awesome record. And this pressing, it's got kind of an interesting, it's a different gatefold experience than I had. I had an original U.S. pressing from 1988, but this is different. And inside, there's a Chinese proverb on the inner where the record is, which is kind of interesting. But and then on the back, a beautiful, lush, tropical forest, if you will, and then the cunning picture of the chimpanzee on the front. I consider this, again, this is their swan song, but I consider this a crown jewel for them. I mean, this is their last album, and they really put it all together. So let's go right into it. Side one, and just to recap, the lineup: Chris France on drums, Tina Weymouth on bass, that's her, Tina, Jerry Harrison on guitars and keyboards, and David Byrne, guitars and vocals. And this album was augmented by lots of other musicians, percussionists, horn players, banjo players. So side one opens with a song called Blind. It's got a really nice groove, and right away, you're hearing the polyrhythms. It's got some really nice horns, so it's a really great song to open the album. The bridge, it's kind of, it's got an interesting bridge where David Byrne is singing "No sense of harmony, don't mention harmony, no sense of harmony, no sense of time." So it's kind of interesting, like you're listening and everyone's playing wonderfully, and so it's sort of a dichotomy. The music is in perfect time, and these sort of awkward lyrics. But that's classic Talking Heads, right? There's some. I thought I heard some tuba in there, and just overall the horn arrangements were great. Probably by David Byrne himself. The next song, Mr. Jones, to me that like I could hear sort of Oriental music in the opening. That was kind of cool. And then more horns, and I thought that the horns in this particular song, to me, really evoked New Orleans. There was that sort of New Orleans feel. Some more great horn lines. And I noticed Tina, in particular, early in this period, Tina Weymouth, her bass line in this song early was great. Again, you can hear different layers of music and production, but it's all really effective, and it's just put together really well. The horns really stuck out on this one. The next song is called "Totally Nude." There's some nice steel guitar, like a steel guitar intro, maybe a dobro. Um, and so I mentioned earlier about different session players, different musicians playing on this record. The album was the core tracks were recorded in Paris, Paris, France, in the fall of 1987. And one of the musicians, I'm assuming who was there, um, anyway, his name is Eric Weisenberg. He's a famous banjo player. He plays other instruments, and you may be familiar with him in the movie Deliverance. He was on that soundtrack. He was the banjo player. So Eric Weisenberg, he's playing the pedal steel guitar on the intro, and I was hearing some really sort of. I thought the album was recorded in the Bahamas. For some reason I was sort of fixated on that when I was listening, and I think the back image of the album was, I was thinking these guys were recording in Nassau, for example, but obviously they were in Paris. But a lot of the music evokes these sort of island images and views, if you will. And then and I noticed in this song, "Totally Nude," we hear lyrics, "Nature boy, nature man, take me along." This one definitely was more joyous, but sort of a trend we'll be talking about. Like sort of the reconnection with nature. That's a theme that's going to run throughout this album. There was also some, I noticed some, sort of subtle African chants, underneath as the music's going along. Again, more great steel guitar playing by Weisberg. And I do apologize if I mispronounced his name earlier. And then there's a nice little jam at the end, before Chris France ends it. But that's a nice little tune, "Totally Nude." Following that is the third song of the album, "Ruby Deer." This one sort of had a harder style opening, if you will. Interesting percussion on this one. This one was all about the percussion, really. Nice guitars, some great rhythm, and some really nice melodies. And then there was one section that I could hear, to me sounded like like a U2 record, The Edge, when his guitar gets sort of echoey, and it had that sort of sound, if you will. And I know Brian Eno wasn't on this, but there was definitely a strong U2, and this was after U2's big album. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting to hear that. But yeah, that's another great track on the album. Last song on the first side, "Nothing But Flowers." I mean, I really love this song. I've been enjoying this song for a long time. Great guitars open this song. Beautiful lyrics. David singing about Garden of Eden, and sort of painting these visions of nature. He talks about there was a factory, now there are mountains and rivers. This sort of idea of degrowth, sort of decapitalization, if you will. Obviously very relevant. I mean, this came out in 1988, and here we are in 2023, 35 years later, facing huge environmental challenges. So I just like what this song speaks to, if you will, that the Talking Heads, and David Byrne, they have this environmental ethic, if you will, in their music. So it's great. More on that. More lyrics. Once there were parking lots, now it's a peaceful oasis. So again, it's like an ecology anthem. That's how I sort of perceive it. So again, great track. Switching over to side two, I love side two. I listened to it, and after I listened to the record, I listened to side two again. I mean, it was that good. So side two opens with the Democratic Circus. This one has a really cool, funky opening with some really tasty dobro playing. That's Weisberg again. Tina's got a really nice bass line, almost kind of sort of like Remain in the Light sort of feel, if you will, I thought. There's some uh, really nice, so there's a couple guitar things going on. One's finger picking and the other one's playing single note lines. And, um, the lyrics talk about volunteerism. It's almost like a song about, like a national convention comes to your town. And so, the big media circus around that, right? And then at one point, the music gets a little harder. There's a harder edge, still sort of in that funky theme that they had to open up with, just a little bit harder. And then, you know, David talks about almost dying. We almost died. Maybe just from the, sort of the torrent of what a lot of these conventions end up becoming, right? And then he also, he sings about all those celebrities coming down, and again, he's trying to paint this picture of a circus, right? And I like this lyric, towards the end of the song, sort of fading out, and you can hear the dobro outro picking, and David asks, "Now I wonder who's boss and who he's leaving behind." So that's kind of an interesting perception. But again, that, another A+ song, just a great song on the album. So the next song on side 2 after that is called "The Facts of Life." Just, interesting titles as always. Going back to looking at all their albums and their whole discography, they just have zany, sort of off the wall titles, and this continues on Naked. So "The Facts of Life," this one had sort of a different style, kind of rooted in previous albums. Like, I could hear a lot of Fear of Music in this one, and it had, if you know that album, I'm sure you're familiar with the song "Drugs" from Fear of Music, but it had that sort of vamp, if you will. Just like everything else right up to this point, it's just a really outstanding track, almost borderline industrial, compared to a lot of the, the acoustic and sort of natural tribal rhythms that we've heard up to this point. This one, a little more industrial, more bass and drum centric, if you will. And, Tina and Chris, the couple, right? They're just rocking it on this track. And I could hear some of the lyrics. When I listen to a record, I'm not like transcribing the lyrics. I'm actually, writing about the music as I'm listening to it. Some words stick out more so than others, and this particular song, "Burn," I heard him mention Primate, and so if there was a title track, probably this would be it. Going back to, the chimpanzee, our primate cousin, if you will. There was the outro jam was really good with more steel guitar playing, and the jam has become more toned down and more nuanced as they end it, but it ended really nicely. So another great track. The next song, "Mommy, Daddy, You and I." I mean, these titles are just so we get we the song opens with more dobro. And I could hear some accordion in there, very subtle, but definitely. And this one kind of almost had a swampy feel. There were some reggae sort of influence changes, and I could hear some modulation. I mean, there were some pretty cool chord changes, and some very subtle modulation that I heard, and even the lyrics changing the water of life. This music was always changing. This definitely was an interesting track. The next track on side 2, "Big Daddy." This one opened with a bluesy harmonica, and the only other time I could think of the Talking Heads playing blues, "Take Me to the River," just kind of has that bluesy feel, if you will. So this one reminded me of that. But Tina has a great bass line as underneath the harmonica. And this tune really stuck out. I mean, it definitely has a nice groove. There's a lot of cool percussion stuff going on, and all I could think about was Talking Heads blues. I mean, they're not a blues band, but they can, you know, they can play blues and they can play, you know, they can swing blues just like any other band, and they do it well. You know, they have their own thing going. I really love the percussion on this song, and there was another, you know, a really nice sort of horn fade out, if you will. The last song on this pressing is called Cool Water, and it has a pretty mellow opening, you know, almost to me. I mean, it's interesting. The opening sounded like an 80s sort of hair band, power band, you know, a power ballad. You know, it had that sort of opening, you know, which was very popular at the time. So that's why it's easy to make that association. You know, David comes in vocally, almost, you know, followed. It's like Chris is playing like a march beat, and then Tina and Jerry both rise before some really angelic dobro that's kind of sprinkled in, and you know, there's some spoken word. There's a bridge section that's sort of, you know, spoken word, followed by some violin, and there's still a really nice groove under all this stuff, you know. And again, I could hear some U2 stylings, if you will, like just similar what you might hear on a U2 record, you know, just, you know, more associative listening, if you will. You know, they go back into the original theme. I mean, there's some subtle sirens, you know, and the music sort of intensifies, and then there's some. To me, it sounded like an electric flute, but it kind of ended the song and the record. But that was a really great way to end the song and the album. Just another great song. So, I mean, I was, you know, I was blown away, you know, after listening to this record, and to me, you know, it did evoke some of their earlier stuff, you know, as I mentioned, a couple of the album titles, you know, Fear of Music and Remain in Light in particular. But, you know, like I feel, you know, this is like a culmination of them. And, you know, after listening to this and you know, you could hear the different layers that they're sort of famous for, especially after Remain in Light. You know, this is really the peak and culmination of that. And they probably could have kept putting records out. They probably would have all sort of stayed within the framework that they've always had, and maybe that's why they ended it. But again, it doesn't. It's just this. This is just worth repeating how great it is, how great a record this is for them to end it with this quality production. You know, and I'm sure they had a blast recording it. You know, they were in Paris. You know, I'm sure they were having a good time, and you know, it definitely reflects in the music. And you know, I mean, there's a lot of percussion. You know, African music. I mean, there's a lot of what we would call world music, right? Global music. You know, I mentioned reggae and you know, getting some of the island vibes, and there were some African influences. You know, lots of beautiful dobro and acoustic, but all sort of, you know, high energy and you know, danceable and polyrhythmic, absolutely polyrhythmic. So just a great record. So I highly recommend this one. You know, think about what was popular in 1988. You know, there were a lot of 80s, you know, power ballads, you know, 80s hair bands, if you will, Def Leppard. That stuff was really raging on MTV at the time. And I feel like this album kind of slips under the radar a little bit compared to a lot of that stuff. I mean, hip hop 1988 was huge, was arguably hip hop's biggest year in terms of just becoming, you know, a bona fide genre, you know, in the mainstream with incredible innovation. So it's interesting because I think, you know, when the Talking Heads first got together, you know, they supported early hip hop artists, graffiti artists, and early hip hop DJs and MCs. So, you know, it's interesting that they, just as hip hop really starts to explode, they sort of, you know, that's when they decide to sort of take a break, if you will, right? But again, great album, and definitely recommend it. That's all I want to say about this one. So again, thanks for tuning in, and definitely You know, if you're a Talking Heads fan, you know, get a copy of this. You won't be disappointed. And even if you're not, if you're a fan of world music, if you're a fan of percussion and you know, polyrhythmic music, this is the perfect album for you. You'll love it. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great one. Bye.